Welcome to the debate. When you watch a masterful theater performance, there is this illusion that every single movement on stage is preordained. The script is written, the blocking is set, the lighting cues are programmed down to the millisecond.
Right.
You sit in the audience and you simply trust the director's overarching vision to unfold.
Yeah, and it feels entirely seamless.
But that seamlessness completely obscures the reality of live performance. I mean, what happens when an actor suddenly breaks the fourth wall? Or, when a prop breaks and they have to improvise a line that wasn't in the script just to save the scene.
Exactly.
And the question becomes, is that sudden improvisation ruining the play, or is it possible that the director deliberately left room for the actor to shape the narrative in real time?
It's a great question.
Today, we are examining a profoundly rich collection of biblical exegesis and modern personal testimonies that wrestles with this exact tension. Not on a literal stage, obviously, but in the theater of human existence. The central issue we are analyzing is the deep philosophical and theological friction between divine providence, which is yielding to an absolute preordained control, and active human agency, meaning self-advocacy and strategic action.
Yeah, the material we are looking at today presents a fascinating and honestly often paradoxical duality regarding how an individual should respond to adversity. It looks at how they should make decisions and how they should navigate earthly power structures.
Right.
It essentially asks us whether faith is fundamentally an act of passive endurance or an act of aggressive participation.
And I will argue today that the text fundamentally champions complete surrender. What the author calls strategic withdrawal is positioned as the absolute highest expression of faith, demonstrating that God's foreknowledge gracefully overrides our clumsy human efforts.
And I will argue the exact opposite. I believe this material actually highlights the absolute necessity of active human agency, self-preservation, and the moral imperative of utilizing one's earthly position to actively challenge inequities within that divine framework.
Well, let's lay out our frameworks and see where the friction really starts. When I read this material, the overriding thesis is a profound submission to divine orchestration over human action.
Okay.
The text centers heavily on the Apostle Paul, characterizing him initially as an ardent wrongdoer and a violent persecutor of the early church. Yet he is chosen, as the text explicitly quotes, as of one born out of due time.
Which is a very specific theological framing.
Precisely. The sheer mechanics of Paul's transformation prove that human merit or human striving is completely irrelevant. It is about a sovereign power electing an individual despite their actions, not because of them. So the core mechanism of faith, therefore, is getting out of the way. The text analyzes this through the concept of timely withdrawal, citing some pretty incredible historical precedents. Take the story of Jacob, for instance.
Right, with his father-in-law Laban.
Yes. For those who might not know that story, Jacob is dealing with a father-in-law who keeps changing his wages, cheating him, and growing increasingly hostile.
Yeah, it was a very toxic situation.
Very. And Jacob doesn't stay and fight a legal battle. He physically steps away from Laban's intensifying hostility. Christ withdrew when the local populations attempted to provoke division, moving instead to Samaria. Paul was redirected from contentious environments to the Gentiles.
So you're saying the pattern is always retreat?
In every single instance? Yes. The text argues that stepping back and letting God orchestrate the strategic movement is the ultimate model for spiritual success. The author literally writes, it's not about who we are, but who God is.
I hear that interpretation, and, if you only look at the sheer fact that they moved locations, you might conclude the text is advocating for passivity. But I look at the exact same text and see a manifesto for vigorous human engagement and resistance to systemic injustice.
Really? A manifesto?
Absolutely. If we look at Acts 22, which is the pivotal chapter the author focuses on, Paul is literally bound with leather thongs, facing imminent brutal scourging by Roman soldiers.
Right, a horrific physical punishment.
Yes, one that often killed people before they even made it to a cross. Now, if the ultimate model of faith is passive surrender, Paul should have bowed his head, embraced the suffering, and accepted the whip as divine will.
But he doesn't.
He doesn't do that at all. He actively invokes his earthly, secular legal status, He waits until they tie him up, and then he challenges the centurion, asking, "Is it lawful for you to scourge a man that is a Roman and uncondemned?" He weaponizes the legal framework of his day for his own self-preservation. This demonstrates that the author views faith not as passive endurance, but as an active tactical navigation of earthly systems. You don't just wait for a miracle to stop the whip. You use your voice and your civil rights.
That's an interesting point, though. I would frame it differently. You're calling it a triumph of self-advocacy, but look at the author's actual takeaway from that event.
Okay.
You are focusing on the moment Paul speaks up, but you are missing the macro structure of what the text calls strategic withdrawal. Let me ask you this. Why does withdrawal actually work in the framework of this text?
You mean psychologically or spiritually?
Both, really. Withdrawal works because it fundamentally shifts the burden of outcome. When human beings try to force an outcome, we create friction. It's like sailing.
Sailing. Okay, I'm tracking.
The wind is divine providence. You can't control it, you can't summon it, and if you fight a gale force wind, your boat capsizes. But human agency, in your view, is setting the sail. What I'm saying is that the text argues there are moments you actually have to drop the sail entirely.
Drop the sail.
Yes, Jacob couldn't reason with Laban. He had to physically withdraw, so divine direction could fill the vacuum and guide him back to Canaan. Christ didn't stay and debate the people who wanted division. He withdrew to accomplish his ordained work with the Samaritan woman.
Right, but
Withdrawal is not a failure of agency. It is the ultimate agency of choosing to let the director run the play. It guarantees God's direction precisely because human interference is removed.
I love the sailing analogy, but I think you're misapplying it to the author's actual words. The author explicitly qualifies this concept. The text literally says, withdrawal was not avoidance.
Right, they do say that.
It is a strategic movement. You aren't dropping the sail, you are tacking against the wind to find a better angle. And to prove that this doesn't just mean passive retreat, look at the author's profound reflection on David at Ziklag.
Let's explain Ziklag, because that's a heavy reference for anyone not steeped in the historical texts.
Right, of course. So for those unfamiliar, David, before he is officially king, returns home to his city, Ziklag, to find that an enemy raiding party has burned the entire city to the ground.
Complete devastation.
Exactly. Worse, they have taken all the women and children captive, including David's own family. His men are so devastated they are actually talking about stoning him. It looks like absolute death.
Yeah, it's a brutal scene.
Now, in a purely passive framework, David would sit in the ashes of Ziklag, surrender to the pain and say, God's will be done. I drop the sail. But he doesn't do that.
He prays. He asks God what to do.
Yes, but he doesn't pray for God to magically fix it. He actively intercedes and asks a tactical military question. Shall I pursue? And the divine response is not, wait, and I will restore it for you.
It's you shall recover it all.
Exactly. You shall recover it all. David had to get up, rally his exhausted men, track down the raiding party, and physically fight to get his family back. The text requires an active, dynamic response to crisis. Prayer in this text isn't a substitute for action, it is the catalyst for pursuit.
I completely understand why you read Ziklag as an endorsement of tactical action, but let me give you a different perspective on how the text views the outcomes of those actions.
Sure.
Even when action is taken, the overriding covering is providential. Let's return to Paul being spared from the centurion scourge in Acts 22.
Okay, back to Paul.
You view his invoking of his Roman citizenship as a triumph of human self-advocacy. But what is the author's ultimate summary of Paul's survival and subsequent mission to the Gentiles? The author writes this exact phrase: "This demonstrates that God orders all things and that they do work together for good."
But the mechanism of his survival was his own mouth.
The mechanism, yes, but the author frames Paul's survival not as a victory of Roman jurisprudence, but as a testament to divine protection. The citizenship was merely the instrument God foreknew and provided long before Paul was even tied to the whipping post.
So you're saying Paul was just a piece on the board?
Basically, yes. The emphasis remains completely on the divine ordering of events. The action Paul takes is entirely secondary to the fact that God already paved the road.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why.
By all means.
You can't wash past the Roman citizenship as just a neat little instrument God used. The text doesn't brush past it. If you read the text commentary on Paul's Roman citizenship, it pivots into a stunningly sharp critique of systemic injustice.
It does.
Yes. The author explicitly points out long-existing injustices and social inequities in the ancient world.
Well, the author does mention that the world is flawed, yes.
It goes much deeper than just calling it flawed. The author draws a brilliant, highly specific parallel to his story in 2 Samuel 18. This is a story where General Joab needs to send a message to King David that his son Absalom is dead.
Right.
Joab intentionally sends Cushi, a Nubian messenger, into harm's way to deliver the bad news, while deliberately sparing Ahimaaz, a Jewish messenger who wants to go. The author explicitly states this story demonstrates a measure of human worth based upon ethnicity.
It's a striking sociological observation to find in this kind of exegesis, I'll give you that.
Exactly. And then the author brings that right back to Paul. The text notes that Paul's life was spared because he was discovered to be Roman, but when the authorities merely perceived him as Jewish, they were perfectly willing to let him be cruelly and unjustly scourged.
Mm-hmm.
The text is hyper-aware of ethnic privilege and social hierarchies. It is acknowledging that human worth is constantly being weighed by corrupt systems. Paul actively leveraged his Roman privilege to save his own life.
So you think the author is demanding action against these systems?
Yes, the author is demanding that we recognize these earthly realities, that some messengers are sent to slaughter based on ethnicity, and some are spared based on citizenship, and actively maneuver through them, rather than passively waiting for a supernatural shield.
I grant you that the text's awareness of structural inequities and ethnic hierarchies is incredibly acute. It doesn't paint a rosy picture of the world. But I have to push back on your conclusion.
Fair enough.
You're suggesting the text wants us to actively maneuver and fight these systems. But what is the author's prescriptive solution to corrupt earthly systems? Do they advocate for political revolution? Do they suggest legal warfare or protesting the Roman centurions?
Well, no, but
They don't. The author specifically shifts focus to praying for the recent city contractors and a local commissioner in their own modern town. The text reads, God is able to enlighten all leaders and convert them.
Right.
The author prays for city leaders, hoping to find those whose hearts were tendered towards Christ. This is incredibly telling. The ultimate reliance is on God changing hearts from the inside out, not on human beings dismantling systems from the outside in.
But still,
Even when acknowledging deep, brutal systemic flaws, the mechanism for change prescribed by the material is spiritual intercession, trusting that the king's heart is in the Lord's hands. It's a withdrawal from the political battlefield into the spiritual one.
but intercession is an action. It is a targeted wielding of spiritual influence. Praying for a specific city commissioner by name is not dropping the sail. It is actively adjusting the rigging.
That's a clever way to put it.
But look, I want to pivot us slightly. A listener hearing this might think, wait, how can we compare surviving a brutal Roman scourging to praying for a local city commissioner? It feels like a massive leap in stakes.
That's the beauty of this text, though. It scales perfectly. The author applies the exact same theological framework of ancient kings and apostles to their own modern daily life.
Right, and that's exactly where I want to go. Let's move from the macro level of ancient Roman law down to the micro level of faith in daily life, because the text grounds these high concepts in very practical personal testimonies. And this is where the passivity argument really falls apart for me.
I'm so glad you brought up the personal testimonies, because I think they actually solidify the theology of surrender. Look at the author's struggle with home improvements, specifically the new front porch they are trying to build.
Ah, yes. The famous cement base incident.
Exactly. The author is agonizing over pouring this cement base. They want to preserve a specific circular shape in the yard. They are dealing with city workers. They are trying to get buy-in from the local authorities, and it only causes immense confusion and stress.
Very relatable homeowner stress.
Absolutely. And the human effort to control the outcome is portrayed as exhausting and deeply counterproductive. And what is the ultimate spiritual victory in that anecdote? The author writes, "Here I am again, Lord. Finally I knew. Trust God with it."
let it go. It is the total cessation of striving. The author realizes that working towards a specific outcome doesn't yield divine wisdom. The victory is total passivity regarding the result.
Okay, hold on. We need to dissect that letting go moment because I think we are hitting the absolute core of our disagreement here. You are framing letting go as total passivity, as if she just threw her hands up and walked away.
Because she did.
But look at the actual sequence of events in that porch story. The text shows a highly active, incredibly modern process of data gathering and structural planning.
She says she let it go.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered what she actually does? She didn't just blindly pour cement and hope for the best. The text explicitly states that she consulted artificial intelligence.
Oh, wow.
Yes, think about the profound irony there. Using the most cutting-edge human tool, AI, to execute a divinely inspired home improvement project. She consulted AI, she consulted her sister, and she brought in 2 faithful saints to analyze the problem.
That is a lot of consultation.
Right? Through all of this research, she deduces that extending the base over the grassy opening would structurally fortify the porch much better. She did the research. She gathered empirical data. She even admits she wanted this enclosed porch for her home's advancement and my comfort.
But she dreaded the look of it. She didn't want to ruin the circular aesthetic.
Exactly. And that is the absolute aha moment of this text. What she surrendered was the anxiety of the aesthetic outcome. She let go of her rigid attachment to how she wanted it to look.
I see.
But she did not surrender the physical agency of building a structurally sound foundation. She still executed the superior architectural plan that she gathered through AI and her community. Surrendering anxiety is not the same thing as surrendering agency.
That is a fascinating distinction. Surrendering anxiety versus surrendering agency. I see the line you're drawing, but I would argue that in the text's theological framework, the physical actions, consulting AI, pouring the concrete, are ultimately rendered subordinate to the spiritual realization.
How so?
The physical world is just the theater where the spiritual yielding happens. Look at how she summarizes the renovations. She lists a litany of accomplishments: brand new front porch, new gutters, newly painted interior, a tuned-up furnace.
A lot of good work.
But she explicitly tags these achievements with the phrase, by faith. She writes, "Glory, some things I never thought would or could be done."
Which is a beautiful sentiment of gratitude.
It's more than gratitude, it's an attribution of source. The text insists that we don't have to know the outcome, or how it will look, or where we will end up, just the way, which is trusting the Savior. It parallels Abraham going out to a place for an inheritance, not knowing whither he went.
Right.
The physical data gathering you mentioned, the AI, the city workers, that is just the noise of the earthly journey. The actual substance of the achievement is attributed entirely to God, glorifying the place of his feet. And we see this purely divine, unsolicited grace again in the incredible phenomenon the author witnesses in their living room.
Oh, the red light phenomenon?
Yes. For the listener, the author describes standing in their living room when, through the front window, a tiny star-like light pierces the clouds, flooding the room. Then it turns a deep, purple-tinged blood-red hue before a crystal blue sky finally breaks through. The author explicitly views this as God using his own creation to meet them exactly where they stood.
It's a very vivid description.
It is a completely sovereign act of God communicating through nature, entirely independent of any human agency, effort, or architectural planning. It is God simply acting, and the human simply receiving.
It is a profound, deeply mystical moment in the text. I really don't want to strip the wonder from it. But again, look at the physical actions taken in response to the wonder. When the author saw the unusual blood-red hue, they didn't just fall to their knees, close their eyes, and accept it as a raw mystic vision. What did they do?
Well, they stepped outside.
Yes. They write, "I wondered whether the windows or blinds were distorting the light, so I stepped onto the front porch." Think about what that means.
They were being practical.
More than practical. In the middle of a divine encounter, they actively applied the scientific method. They physically relocated to test a hypothesis about optical distortion. Even in the face of a profound spiritual experience, the author's human agency, their curiosity, and their rational investigation are fully engaged.
That's true. They didn't just ignore their surroundings.
Exactly.
They didn't turn off their brain to experience God. Just like Abraham, you mentioned, he didn't know where he was going. That's true, but Abraham still had to pack his tent. He still had to physically walk into the desert. Faith in this text is an operational verb.
It is a remarkable synthesis of the mundane and the miraculous, I will give you that.
It has to be, because when the author talks about the burning of Ziklag, they acknowledge that a burning might be ahead for them personally. They know hardship is coming, but they declare, I shall recover also.
That is a strong declaration.
It's a declaration of intent to pursue. The text warns against being pulled into total darkness and notes the necessity of keeping away from detrimental presences. These are active protective measures. The author is constantly participating in their own rescue, their own sanctification, and yes, their own property value.
Well, as we look at the sum of this material, from ancient battlefields to modern living rooms, my position remains that the text ultimately constructs a worldview where God's foreknowledge and sovereign power are paramount, constantly overshadowing human striving.
Even with the AI consultation?
Even then, whether we are looking at God calling an ardent wrongdoer and persecutor out of due time to become an apostle, or orchestrating a strategic withdrawal to protect his servants from toxic division, or simply taking over the agonizing anxieties of a home improvement project, the core demand on the believer is to yield, to step back. The material consistently demonstrates that when we stop forcing our own narratives, when we stop demanding the porch looks exactly the way we want it to, and trust that all things are ordered for good, we allow the divine to act. The sail must be dropped for the current to take us home.
And my position remains that while the text deeply reveres divine sovereignty, it reveals a much more dynamic, participatory framework for the human being. Believers are not asked to be passive pawns on a chessboard.
They are expected to actively use their voices to challenge ethnic hierarchies and injustice, to utilize their earthly citizenship and legal rights just as Paul did. They are expected to pursue recovery from the ashes like David at Ziklag, and to consult modern resources, even AI, to fortify their foundations.
They certainly don't sit still.
Exactly. The text shows us a faith that has vigorously engaged with the realities of the land of the living, pushing back against social inequities and actively, rationally navigating the physical world. We don't drop the sail. We learn how to catch the wind.
There is a profound and likely unresolvable tension in this material between trusting the unseen just one and the absolute necessity of navigating the very tangible, often unjust world we inhabit. It highlights the immense value of reading these historical texts and these deeply personal modern reflections through multiple lenses.
Absolutely, because when you view it through only one lens, you miss half the reality of what the author is experiencing. You miss the nuance between surrendering the anxiety of an outcome and abandoning your agency to shape it.
Exactly. It brings us right back to our theater from the beginning of the show. Is the actor's sudden improvisation a rebellion against the script? Or is it the very performance the director was waiting for them to give all along?
It's something to think about.
We invite you, the listener, to examine the material for yourself and determine where the line between absolute surrender and fierce self-advocacy truly lies in your own life. Thank you for joining us.